Storytelling is important in business, just like it's important in real life. Story is important because it's how we make sense of the world around us. Storytelling is essential. Storytelling is what bonds us. Stories are how we make sense of the world. Every single human being constructs their entire world with story. Stories resonate with us. Without story, we can't communicate and we can't understand. Even a loving embrace and a hug that gives you a deep, warm feeling is giving you a deep, warm feeling because you're putting that into a story in your mind about what that means to you. Stories connect in a way unlike any other information. You will communicate in a way that people not only understand, but care about. A data sheet or a PowerPoint presentation that isn't fueled by story is nothing to care about. A great story affects you. A great story affects you. A storyteller will know that their message is connecting with an audience because that audience will lean in. And when people lean in, they want to know more, they want to engage, and they want to act. Storytelling is important in business, just like it's important in real life. Stories are literally the bridge between people. The bridge between people. Storytelling is what bonds us. Stories are literally the bridge. Stories are how we make sense of the world. Hello and good morning. I'm so excited to have you here today. I'm particularly excited because I just got off a call with one of our corporate clients where we were actually capturing some of that video for that type of video that you just saw. High energy music, docutronica is what we call it, and it's a great way of showcasing your customers' stories. Whilst you saw me in that one, imagine that was your customers. And today we are going to be talking about how you can generate demand and accelerate sales pipeline without having to learn those confusing entertainment frameworks. That's right. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to learn anything about storytelling to try and apply it in business, but you've probably run across things like this, these confusing frameworks, right? You're busy, you've got enough on your plate, you didn't choose to be an author or a film director. Now, some of you might be experiencing this and might love this and want to geek out on that stuff, like I have, but not every single business person does. And it's highly likely that you're in the 80% that don't have the time to learn 17 steps of Joseph Campbell's monomyth. Wouldn't it be a lot easier if you had something like this? 3 simple things that you had to remember so that you could then start telling those stories. Exactly. So this is our 3D framework. Our 3D framework allows you to see your story from all angles. And it's beautifully simple. The simplest storytelling frame on the planet. And I'm sorry, but beginning, middle, and end is a framework that is pretty much useless to anybody. What do I do in the beginning? What do I do in the middle? What do I do in the end? How about coming up with a framework that actually triggers the extraction of what you need to include? So desire, difficulty, and that fancy French word denouement. I'll get to that one in a second. You've probably got some questions about it. But every story involves a person. Now, the beauty of this framework is we don't even have to mention that because we say desire. Does an inanimate object have desire? No, exactly. So we don't even have to include people, let alone heroes in this framework, because as soon as you start thinking about the desire, for example, of your customer or your audience, maybe their desires, you're immediately going to start thinking about them and putting them at the center. Another way of describing that would be an outside in focus rather than an inside out, which a lot of companies unfortunately fall into the trap of. Now, is everything we want in life easy to get? No, right? There's always something that stands in the way. No matter how simple the desire that we have is, there's always that opportunity for things that slow us down and get in our way. If you were going to geek out on storytelling, this would be the place where you're starting to look at things like the villains, right? The things that are slowing down that hero in that journey. But again, you don't want to be thinking about that level of storytelling detail. You want to be focused on stories that make sense for your business and that resonate with your customers. So, what are the difficulties standing in the way of your customers achieving that desire? Now, we pack a lot into this third D, and I chose it for a couple of reasons, not least of which it wouldn't be the 3D framework without 3Ds, right? But the beauty of the French word denouement, which I still struggle to spell, being dyslexic and having ADHD, it's not surprising, but the literal English translation is the untangling of the knot. You see, what I've seen happen in business, whether it's talking about case studies or value propositions or even executives getting up on stage, there's this problem, solution, benefit mindset or situation, complication, resolution. Now, these aren't necessarily completely bad, but they don't do enough. And they feed into that trap that so many of us have fallen into in business, and that is focusing on ourselves, the inside out, rather than the outside in. So when we think about denouement, it's not just the resolution. It's not just the benefit. It's not just the conclusion. It's not just the outcomes or the results. It does include all those things because that knot is tight and it's got lots of loops in it and there's lots of elements to it. However, those pieces are only a part of the puzzle. Because we're talking about people wanting something and navigating through a difficulty so that they can get it, we're also talking about the fundamentals of what it's like to be human. What happens to you when you fail forward, if you will? You learn, right? One of the things that anybody who has ever spent 5 minutes talking about failure in business understands is we can't succeed if we don't fail. There's a great quote I love. It's the "I've never failed. I've just found 1,000 ways that didn't work." Or was it 100? Thomas Edison. Anyway, so if we fail and we learn, is it really a failure? So every story that requires the overcoming of that obstacle is inevitably going to bring learnings with it. And those learnings that that person went through in the story that you're telling are learnings that you're able to transfer to the person who's hearing the story. I heard another great quote once, and it said, smart people learn from their own mistakes. Brilliant people learn from other people's mistakes. And that's the joy of being human and having this consciousness, this awareness of our ability to write books and put ideas down so that other people can read them and can learn from them. And so that is an essential part of how we want to think about this. Now, that takeaway, that little nugget, that data, that's also another reason why I chose the fancy French word denouement, the untangling of the knot, because that's going to stick with you. So that little story structure of you want to communicate better to your customers so that you can engage them and you can get them to do something, which could be engaging with a campaign that you're running, finding more information, speaking to a salesperson, and ultimately buying. And the difficulties that stand in the way. You're busy, your products are complicated. You don't know what you should necessarily prioritize as the main thing that you should be focusing on with any particular audience. You're juggling a lot of stuff. You're running campaigns. You've got meetings. You've got emails to deal with, and you're expected to come up with a story. So how do you untangle that knot? Well, you need a simple approach. You need to think outside in. You need to focus on the customer, and you need that simple framework that can help you get going. And that's where the 3D framework comes in. And when you use that, like I use it every single day, you get better at it, you get faster at it, and you practice it. And it could be something as simple as a conversation, or what I just did, that little mini story about you sitting in the center of that world and that experience. Or it could be something deeper and longer, such as that keynote presentation that you're preparing for your CEO. And so there we've got it. The learnings, the framework, the 3D framework, which is the tool, right, that I'm offering up to you, all within that tight little framework. So I would encourage you tonight to tell a story when you're sitting around the dining room table with your family, or you're chatting with your parent on the phone, or you're having a post-work happy hour drink with a best friend or a colleague. Tell a story about your day. Start with what you wanted to achieve, what was standing in the way, and then how did you untangle that knot? Okay, so nice, simple way to get going with storytelling. One of the things you'll also be aware of when it comes to stories is the emotion that can come along with stories. The things that reach into us and touch us, that make us feel something. We're a complicated soup of electrical signals and chemical signals, including things like dopamine. And it's in the right information delivered in the right way that those hormonal triggers can be released. And when they are, we feel something. Do we want people to feel something when they hear one of our business stories, in the same way that you might feel something when you're watching that favorite TV show of yours? Obviously, we're not making TV shows, we're making business stories, but we still want to tap into that power. Don't go looking at the hero's journey to try and figure this out. Instead, meet your customers where they are with the story meet method. This is designed to get you thinking about what emotions could be in your audience's hearts and minds that you can tap into, that you can trigger in a way that is, and please use these powers for good, is going to get the type of action that you want to drive. So let's talk about each one of these things. And again, like with the 3D framework, these are a starting point for you. These are ideas for inspiration. These are, if you will, hacks, so you can start hacking into that topic and working on it immediately. So the first one, morals. When you think morals, I would also encourage you to think about things like values. These are the things that we, either as individuals or as a family or a community or a religion or a culture, have as guidelines to how we behave. What are those morals? What are the things that help shape our behavior? When we think about our customers, what is their perspective? And it could well be very different to our own. Again, outside in. What are the morals and values that matter for this particular audience that you have, for the particular desires they have and the difficulties they have with that? Are there morals involved? There always will be some level of it. How does that relate to the story that you're trying to tell? Emotions, essential emotions. I like to add the word essential in here because it actually brings more emotion to saying emotions. What are those essential emotions? The most important emotions. We have often heard in business the three-letter acronym: fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Those are emotions. And in some situations, there are fears, uncertainties, and doubts. It's not all negative. There can be emotions such as anticipation, excitement, desires. What are those as they relate to the desire and the difficulty of the story that you're trying to tell? These are the feelings that really exist for your audience in and around this topic. The framework is going to give you that starting point to sit down and to begin extracting what these elements are. And I tell you what, you're probably going to run into a bit of a roadblock yourself, a difficulty as you try and do this. If that's the case, go and speak to your sales team, speak to some partners, customers themselves, somebody that just spent a bunch of time at a customer site. What emotions were expressed? Was it the fears, the uncertainties? Was there aspirations? Was there inspiration that they wanted to pursue? You start doing that and you're going to start to get some great hypotheses around what those essential emotions are. Now, you could also go even further. You could design research around this. You could run focus groups. You could probe your audience. You could explore the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When we run research along these lines, we have a collection of questions designed to do exactly this, so that we can start to extract and build our awareness of these emotions, so that when we're designing the stories to tell for our clients, that they include the emotions that are going to create this type of engagement. Okay, what is a truth? Things are just a certain way sometimes. These are things that people hold dear, not quite the same as a moral or a value, but something that's just a fact, right? One of the stories I like to describe when it comes to the desire and the difficulty is, if I'm hungry and it's lunchtime, if I haven't prepared a lunch for myself, if I have nothing in the company fridge, then I start looking at restaurants that might be nearby. Is there something in walking distance? Do I really feel like eating that? Do I have to get in a car or get a bus to go and get what I want? All of these difficulties. Now, these are truths to wanting lunch. These are truths to solving hunger, right? The truth to solving hunger is, I need to eat something. It's lunchtime. I need to get lunch, and I'm going to be hungry, and maybe I'm going to be grumpy. Maybe I'm going to have low blood sugar level. These are truths that exist around this very simple act that we all go through every single day. So when you think about your customers, what are the acts that they're going through? What are the truths of that situation? And when you start to do this, you start to get to a place where those stories that you're going to tell also include something engaging that is going to stick with your audience and make those stories interesting. Now, with the next model I'm going to share is, how do we figure out what stories to tell in the first place? This is our narrative trip storytelling framework, and we always start with this absolutely essential element at the beginning, and that is transformation. There is Newton's second law: a motion will remain in its current state unless acted upon by an equal or opposite force. Probably got that. I probably butchered that. But the point being, unless there is something acting on us or our family or our life or our business, we're going to keep doing the same thing. And it's the transformations that are happening in the world that affect the changes that happen in our companies, for example, our customers' companies, and then the teams within those companies, and then the individuals within those companies, the change that has to be managed and dealt with. Your product is trying to solve one of those things at some level. Your service helps resolve and make a life better, to create a transformation against this backdrop of transformation. So when we think about the big story that we want to tell, we need to be telling a story that makes sense for the world. And by the time we get to using the 3D framework and the story meat method to actually tell some specific stories, we want to make sure that those stories are all aligned. We want to make sure that in the stories we tell in our conversations, in our marketing campaigns, through our sales teams, through our partner channel, we want to ensure that there's alignment. Now, it's okay for those stories to vary. You might even be responsible for designing the different stories that get told through these different channels. But it's okay if they are different, if they're fresh, if they talk about different customers, different audiences. But the risk there is alignment. Are those stories all pulling in the same direction? Have Santa and his reindeer, are they all pointed in the direction of where the next presents are being delivered? Or are those reindeer going off in all directions and pulling that sleigh apart? And that's what happens in business frequently when you don't have the big story. We like to call it a strategic narrative. When you don't have a strategic narrative, you don't have that framework to tell all these stories. And that's what the TRIP storytelling methodology does. And it all starts with that transformation that's happening in the world and the changes that forces upon organizations and individuals. Now, if there's a transformation, there's got to be some reasons to believe in that transformation. There's a head and a heart to this. The head is things like trends, data, facts. If I know that in the next 18 months to 24 months, there's going to be a change in regulations that's forcing a transformation, what is that regulation? Take the famous GDPR regulation for Europe. You might remember the stories that were told at that time, for example, of the number of emails that get sent out and the amount of spam that gets sent out. You might have heard the number of people who had their identity stolen. You might have heard of the volume of spam, the increase in spam over time. There's people's information being sold. How much was it sold for? How many people? Was this done through nefarious reasons, or was a company breached and its data was stolen and it wasn't protected? These are the facts. And then the facts, when they change over time, are the trends. That's the head. The heart is, if this change is happening in the world, how do I feel about that? This can relate to what we talked about with fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And it can tap into you can use a MEAT method, the story MEAT method, to explore what these emotions could be. What are the aspirations that people have because of this change? When you looked at that big shift from on-premises computing to cloud computing, it opened up opportunities for some, but it also created fears for others. And so from an opportunity perspective, maybe a story you were telling was about how that somebody recognized the opportunity for their career and capitalized on that. Maybe that's a story that gets told. Or the flip side of it, maybe the stories of the number of IT professionals whose jobs were at risk was told. These inevitably connect to people's well-being and their livelihoods. And I guarantee you, if there's anything that's emotional, is somebody's livelihood. So what are those reasons to believe that this transformation that we've been talking about has the meat on the bones to justify why this big story matters? After that, we want to think about the top or the core innovation that you bring to the table to help solve this. This is challenging. In fact, we have a whole separate element of our business through the product marketing sensibilities that I have developed and experienced working as a product marketer for many years. And that is the value proposition, or the positioning and messaging framework. How do we position this value proposition to a particular audience? And the act of going through all that is very much a prioritization effort. We're actually running a couple projects like this right now. We've run the workshop. We've identified the pains that the customers experience. We've identified the proofs. We've voted. We've prioritized. We've put those together into a positioning and messaging framework. And then that bubbles up to the top with that overarching positioning. What is that for your company? What's special? Is it a product feature? Is it a capability? Is it something about your company culture? Is it about your commitment to customer experience and customer service? What is that special thing about you? This is a tricky one. A lot of companies, a lot of individuals have fallen down on this, and I have seen it myself. The word priority used to be singular. And in about the 1920s, I think it was, started to be referred to in the plural, priorities. The fact of the matter is, human brains aren't particularly good at multitasking. They're not at all, especially mine. They're not good at multitasking, and there's only really one priority, and everything else is subservient or below that. So what is that priority? What is the one thing that you want to get across? And this is a challenge to come up with, especially when you're talking about a company. We've worked with corporate clients where the executives themselves disagree on what that important priority is. And so you need to take your whole organization on that journey. The workshopping approach that we use is a really fantastic way to do that and to get everybody's ideas on the table, rationalize those through exercises with individuals, with pairs, with small groups, and ultimately the whole group themselves, where all of those ideas can be heard and everybody can be involved in that prioritization process. If you do that, you will get to what that innovation is. And that is a part of your big story. Okay. So what about P? P, the P of trips. The P is about problems. This relates a little bit to what I talked about with difficulty. But remember, the 3D story framework is about telling that individual story. It's not so much about the big picture story. So what we're talking about here is that transformation. With that transformation, what problems does it impose on society, organizations, individuals? Next up, if you start to tackle that transformation, what are the problems getting going with tackling it? And then as you embark on that, what are the problems that crop up along the way? These are essential. And there's a connection with that difficulty for a very important reason. The narrative is the big picture story. And so you need to understand what the big picture problems are and how those affect the market that you have a relationship with and ultimately the stories that you're going to be telling. Okay, now what about the S of trips? And we want to take people on the full journey, right? That's why this is called trips. So we're taking you on a trip. You're taking your audience on a trip, on a journey. That's what stories do. They do it first in our mind, and then they enable us to go and do it in the real world. And so stories here is about the stories at each stage of the previous elements of the framework. Transformation. Can you tell me a story about this change that's going on in the world? Can you tell me a story about what's happening with, we'll just stick to that example we used earlier, that shift from on-premises computing to cloud computing? Was there a story about a company that tackled it early on? We've often heard about the service provider who was very much first to that game. Arguably, you could say it was Google, but Amazon, of course, with AWS and that shift to the cloud. What are the stories? What's the story about the foundation of AWS? How did that come into being? What is that public story that you can refer to? Because I promise you this, just like a metaphor is a shortcut to understanding, telling an authentic story about something that's happening in the world is also a shortcut to understanding. What kind of stories could you tell about reasons to believe? Well, we talked about the head and the heart. So we talked about the facts and the trends, and we talked about the aspirations. So the facts and the trends could be, here's a very simple, clean example. If you work in business, you've probably heard of Gartner, and you've probably worked with Gartner at some point, especially if you're a corporation, desperately trying to get into the right quadrant on the magic quadrants with Gartner. What is the story? What's the Gartner story? Are there stories about people at Gartner who have been developing the technology lifecycle for this latest technology? This an AI technology adoption lifecycle. How did that come into being? Who created it? Are there stories about companies on that or have gone through that technology adoption curve? And what are those stories? And then the aspirations or the inspirations, the heart of reasons to believe. Is there a story that we can find that expresses somebody in the market that really wanted to do that and maybe was then inspired to actually go and do it? Okay, what about the eye of innovation? What kind of stories can we tell there? Authentic stories are the best stories. The next best to that is a proxy for an authentic story, which is a fictional story which has all the right elements of an authentic story. You have an authentic story. Your company has an authentic story, and that is the founder's story, or the decision to create the new product, or the new business, create the new business unit. The eye of innovation is about what you bring to the table. So what is the story behind that? Why is it important? Why has your company done this? Why do you care about it? Why are you passionate about it? The word why is so important. Make sure you keep that at the top of your lexicon. And then the P of problems, the stories there, authentic stories, case studies or case stories, if you will. That is the perfect type of story to tell around problems. What if you're an entrepreneur and you don't have any customers yet? Not to worry. You may have heard of the Amazon approach to developing a product, which included write a press release for what you want to be said to the market, to the press, when your product is launched. This is a forcing function. Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. You can do that with a story. You can do that with a case study. We like to call it a reference story, just like a reference design in technology, the perfect, the ideal, the way it could be or should be. What is your reference story, your reference case study? Develop that. Imagine that company. Imagine the people in that company, their aspirations, their desires, dealing with this transformation, going through these trends, all the problems that they're dealing with along the way, getting going with it, tackling along the way. That can sound like a lot. Keep it short, half a page. But what is that story you can tell about the problems? Now, once you've done all of these pieces, you will have got the raw material you need to build that big story, to build that strategic narrative. Now, don't fret. You're not alone on this. In fact, we've written a book, and we've got a program as well called Storytelling for Action. Storytelling for Action includes each one of these frameworks. And it doesn't just include the frameworks like I've gone through today on a whistle-stop tour. It includes a breakdown of each framework. It includes a 6-step process for every letter that we talked about today. And then each of those steps has got a collection of hacks, some of which you can lift and immediately use in the story that you're building. Others will inspire you or trigger you to go and find the appropriate one for your business. And this is practical. This isn't to create a film or a novel. This is about practically coming up with the stories for your business. And so we created it as playbooks with worksheets that you can fill out. Now, this is actually already available on ebook on Amazon. Little bit of a preview there, and Barnes and Noble and Google Play and the Apple books. And the print version is coming out hot on its heels very soon. So you can get access to this and you can start using it today. Inside the book, you will also get our approach on how to create a strategic narrative, some of which I mentioned today. You'll see, for example, the workshopping on that. Go ahead and make this full screen so you can see in a bit more detail. And this is included within the Storytelling for Action playbook. And of course, if you've got questions about it, you want to figure out how to apply this, we would love to hear from you. But that, in its essence, is exactly what we're talking about. So you can actually, like I mentioned, you can go in and find the ebook already, but you can also be the first to find out when the print version is released, and you can get access to when the whole program releases, including our training, including some additional resources, and including a bonus customer advocacy pack. So to do that, to get plugged in, to find out about this information, gonarrative.com/SFA, Storytelling for Action, gonarrative.com/SFA. You do that, and you'll also get the bonus, which is our weekly storytelling newsletter, where we share tips and tricks and hacks to help you go ahead and tell better business stories. For example, we just had the past month, we had a series on elevator pitches, and you can actually go and read the blog at gonarrative.com/blog as well. It's a whole bunch of story resources up there. And by signing up to Storytelling for Action, you'll get access to our weekly newsletter, And please go and check out the website, the blog as well. There's a ton of resources on there, and start applying it today. We want to let us know how it goes. In the meantime, though, let's see if I got any questions. Anybody on the line here have any questions? Let's have a look. Okay. So why don't you have heroes or things like that in your frameworks? Well, it's embedded in desire. So if you remember, we were talking about the fact that we didn't want to put too much into these frameworks. We wanted to keep it super streamlined. And so by coming at that word desire, somebody has a desire. So we don't have to include heroes in our frameworks. For somebody that says you don't need to know about movies and books, you do mention Hollywood and the hero's journey quite often as a shortcut to understanding, right? You know what those things are. So I can refer to those. And I can also say you don't need to go that deep into storytelling in that way. Those are designed for entertainment purposes, to come up with that 2-hour movie or that novel. These aren't things that you're doing. So you need different tools to come up with the stories that you're telling in business. And that's why you need just cut out all the BS and just focus on the most important elements in a way that makes sense for business. And so that's why we don't talk. That's why we'll use Hollywood sometimes as a metaphor. I was on a podcast, recorded on a podcast yesterday. Great question. At the end of it, they say it's a Rockstar CMO podcast. Great podcast. Go check it out. And Ian, the host, has got this great question. And he says at the end, what would be the one thing that you would throw into the pool, the sort of the Rockstar CMO pool, the thing you would throw in to get rid of? And I said the Hollywood sign. Okay, so don't focus on Hollywood. Don't focus on the hero's journey. Use these frameworks and you will start applying storytelling in business today. And my mission is to make every business person on this planet a better storyteller. We love helping technology companies and entrepreneurs, and would love to hear from you. So thank you so much for the questions. Thank you for stopping by today. And don't forget to go ahead and sign up for gonarrative.com/storytelling for action. You'll get on the wait list for all the program, or as that's all released. Excuse me. There's a frog in my throat. And thank you so much for stopping by, and have a wonderful day, and go tell some great stories. Start with the 3D framework. And I'll speak to you soon.